Welcome to the High Level Human Podcast, a production of the James McGee Show. With your host, James McGee. He pulls no punches. He's in your face, and he keeps it real. Join him for candid discussions about life, leadership, and living the life of a high-level human.
Welcome back to another episode of the High Level Human Podcast. I am your host. I am James McGee. A little over a year ago, I was driving my wife to Quantico to the FBI National Academy. She was attending. She is a graduate, as I am also. So I was driving her there so I could accompany her on her trip. And I could fly back and she'd have her car while she was there. So we get close, and let me tell you, it's when you go to the National Academy, you have come up through the ranks, and you're more than likely in your department pretty high ranking. You've been there a pretty good while. Normally, you're in your 30s, 40s, sometimes 50s. So you are far removed from college life or military or anything else. So it's a pretty overwhelming experience. You're there for 3 months. And so we get closer, and she asked me, she said, "You got any last minute advice?" And I'm gonna get a little more into this in a few weeks when one of her classmates is a guest here. So I told her, I said, you're ready physically, you're ready academically, but what I don't think you're ready for is the impact that people that you have never met and in just 3 months are going to make on your life, and they're going to be lifelong friends. And she has seen that with me. So I think she doubted me some, but we'll tell that story a little bit more in a few weeks. So in 2021, I retired. It was at the beginning of 2021, and I was having a retirement party. Well, it was pretty, COVID was running rampant at that point. So we had to trim it down some. I had invited about 15 of my classmates. Now, I didn't think any of them would come because of COVID and because of travel, but I wanted to invite them. Well, the day the party came, man, I was nervous that nobody was going to come. So we had at our favorite restaurant, it was on a Sunday, restaurants closed. We had the whole restaurant. And I see a car pull up, first car that pulled up. Man, I got excited. And then I saw Texas tags. And I didn't remember inviting anybody from Texas. Well, we are 30 miles from the Texas border, but I didn't remember inviting anybody from there. So I thought it was just somebody turning around. Well, then the truck parked, and I saw a man get out, and I realized who it was. It was my former classmate, Joe Collins. At that point, I relaxed because it didn't matter if anybody else showed up, because this man drove 3 hours from Houston, Texas to be at my retirement party. So my night was complete. It was done, and it validated what I told my wife. So it's very fitting that Joe is the first guest on this podcast. I'm very excited about that. And I think you're going to get a lot out of the things that Joe says. Joe is a retired police chief from Two Rivers, Wisconsin. Upon retirement, he moved to Texas. Joe is a very accomplished cop, very accomplished leader. But more than anything, Joe is as high level of a human being as you're going to meet. But a couple of years before his retirement, and then after his retirement, still today, he got really involved in officer wellness and police officer mental health. And same thing with any high-level human. A good police officer is a high-level human, and mental health issues are going to come with people who perform at a high level. Man, it's hard. And Joe's done a lot of studying in that. He has a master's degree in organizational behavior. He is, we are going to tackle today a difficult subject. I love tackling difficult subjects, but we're going to tackle some difficult ones today. We're going to tackle the wellness of mental wellness of high-level human beings. We're going to tackle a very difficult subject of suicide. And Joe and I have a personal story. Suicide personally affected both of us tremendously, and we're going to tell that story today. But I also think that, and I talk a lot about being creatures of our environment, and we're going to talk about the environment. And Joe has put himself in a great environment with great people, and that's a big contributor to his success. So, ladies and gentlemen, my friend, my brother, Chief Joe Collins. So, my brother Joe Collins,
Hey.
Man, I am so just stoked that you are here. I appreciate you making the drive down here. Gave you the option to do it on stream, and
Oh, no.
you chose to come here. And man, I will never forget that. You're the first guest, first in-person guest, and that means a whole lot. I already did the intro. You'll hear it after I publish it. Told a little bit about you and where we met, and you came to my retirement party. That meant a lot to me then, and just what the NA brings, has brought to my life, and definitely your life. Let's give a little bit about you, your background, and really about what you're doing now.
Absolutely. So obviously we met at the FBI National Academy in 2009, and what an experience that was. And as what you do and I do, I don't jump into the shallow end of the pool ever. If I'm going to get involved in something, I'm going in the deep end, and I'm hopefully going to survive the jump. And so now what I'm doing after 35 years on the job, I work for Acadia Healthcare now, one of the largest behavioral health providers in the world, if not the biggest, but far the biggest in the United States, and part of the first responder division now. And been a public safety liaison with them over 4 years, full time now. I retired in 2020, a month before the pandemic hit, and been helping first responders and their agencies and family members navigate the behavioral health system, and when they're struggling with something. And a lot of it comes from the job, obviously.
It is, and I think that my show is going to be a lot of law enforcement based, because that's really my network. But not just law enforcement, but high level performers in any profession are going to have, whether we want to admit it, and whether we want to, we need to start admitting it, whether we want to recognize that, you're going to have mental health challenges. Absolutely. Because you're pushing yourself and you're challenging yourself. Obviously you find that?
Oh, 100%. First of all and foremost, life in and itself is hard.
Yeah, you're right.
There's going to be difficult situations. There's going to be crises that occur, events. The military talks about the bang, right? Something's going to happen that's going to test you as a human being, both at work, at home. And I believe it was George Patton that once said that during a crisis is not the time to change your belief system. Is that when you're in it, you're in it. And everything that you brought to the game is the only thing you have access to at that point. You can't go to the hardware store. You can't go somewhere else and find a tool when you're in the fight.
No, you're right. And having a contingency plan, and I'm really an advocate on just being prepared for life. And I always say, nobody's coming to save you. And you have to, now there is help out there, and but you have to first make that commitment to help yourself and save yourself, or it doesn't matter what anybody does. It doesn't matter what you do if somebody's not willing to help themselves.
Well, first and foremost, you got to know something about your own physiology, right? You got to know about your own skills, tools. You can't overestimate your capabilities, because that'll get you even deeper into a problem, right? It's kind of like figuring out if you're going to rewire your house by yourself and you have no technical skills or no electrical skills, right? You got to call a professional, and hopefully you haven't gotten too deep into the problem.
You're right. So you were a police chief for almost 20 years. Was the wellness and the mental health of first responders something you always had a passion for, or was there an incident and you were like, hey, I've got to do something. I've got to learn more about this. How did that interest you?
Wow, that's a good question, because obviously not at the beginning, because you're a hard charger. You're just moving. You're trying to be as busy as possible and do as much as you can within the career field to fulfill yourself, right? And really not understanding maybe what long-term goals are at that point when you're starting. I think that probably one of the more critical situations that happened with me is that I didn't realize that it was in fact affecting me, right? Is that we had a pretty significant fire, right? We lost an 8-year-old, and the officer that was working for me that went to the call had an 8-year-old at home. And we recognized, or we were able to identify him with 2 teeth. That's how bad the situation was, right? And the officer was having a really hard time because it became personal, right? When you have when you see a child and you're dealing with the situation and you have a tie to that and you put yourself in there emotionally, you don't know how much is going to be too much. And he was really struggling with that. So at that point, I decided that, the best thing for him was to go see a peer, right? A peer review and stuff. And that was back in the day when St. Paul actually had a sergeant that was a psych doctor that was working for the police department, running their peer support.
Wow.
And we went there and we did the debriefing with him. And I went with him because my job at that point was to make sure I was taking care of other people, right? And including my people, not realizing the impact that I was having from that call, right? I put that aside because I was having to take care of somebody else, right? And we're really good at taking care of other people. And
yes, you absolutely. We could have a whole podcast about that.
Well, and what we say is that we're really good at taking care of other people, but we suck at taking care of ourselves.
You're right. I was, and we haven't. We'll talk off camera. We'll talk over lunch about a conversation I had with a friend of ours this week, and that is going through some hard times right now. And that's what I told him was, we are not good. I know I'm not. Any first responder, any leader that is a high performer and really takes pride in being that. Now, it's a small percentage, but there are people that are just there for a check and that are some bums. But a true high level first responder is not good at not being able to fix problems. And when it's your problem, all you're focused on is trying to fix it. And sometimes you can't.
Wow. And that's where we get into the brain science about that, is that when you become emotionally attached to something, it triggers different chemicals, right, into your body and your system. And that goes into your reptilian and your mammal brain. That's the core, the first parts of the brain that were formed. That is not your rationality, right? It's the prefrontal cortex. It's the front of our brain, our thinking brain, that actually separates us from the animals, right? And you can't get there if you're emotionally reacting to a situation, and you can't process it intellectually and make correct decisions so that you respond rather than react to the situation, right? Because we always want to respond appropriately in a situation. And if you're spiraling, you can't necessarily do that.
No, you're right. That's a really deep answer. That's why I hang out with smart people. That's why I hang out with educated people. So let's move into that, because that's something that I'm a big advocate of, and I've talked about a lot, is environment. I firmly believe that you surround yourself with high level people, people with ambition, good people, positive people. You're probably going to be one. And on the opposite, you hang out with jerk offs, you're going to be a jerk off. And look, I'm sure I know there was a point in my life where I was hanging out with jerk offs, and I was sitting there wondering why I wasn't getting where I wanted to be in life. What are your feelings on that?
100%. And we jokingly say that there's only 2 people in this world, right? It's the negative people and it's the positive people. So if you're around certain people, you can feel positive energy, right? And you enjoy being around those people. So what I say is that the people are either giving you energy and making you stronger, or they're sucking the lifeblood out of you, right? And we know what that feeling is. And what we have to do is accept the fact that, that person's drawing energy from me. I may have to deal with that person, but I'm going to keep them at a distance. I'm going to control my environment based on how closely I let those people get to me.
Arm's length. And, one thing that when I was in the position to dictate the toxic people, there's a lot of things that, I was never one that just get rid of people at the first time. And anybody can do that. A leader, a true leader, it's challenged to bring people, leadership is really nothing but manipulation. If you look at it, you're trying to get people to do something they otherwise wouldn't. Toxic people, they're just a lot of times that's just who they are.
Absolutely.
And you cannot let toxic people ruin your organization. I'm sure as chief, you've dealt with that.
Well, and it's not just the organization, it's your own life force, right? And your life. So, and people are like that and they're reflecting it toward you. One of the more difficult things to do and understand is it isn't about you. It's about them. And the fact that maybe they don't feel comfortable with their own life choices, with their status in life, why they've gotten to where they are or not where they wanted to be. And then rather than actually building themselves up, what they try to do is undermine other people, right? What do we call them? We call them the toxic people within our organization, right? And
cancer.
Absolutely. And there's only one way to get cancer out of your body. It's going to be damaging, but you got to cut it out, right? And the people that they're bound to like sabotage and bring and people that will just like stir up the pot and create all this chaos and then just step back and watch it.
Yeah.
Right. The pot stirs.
You're right.
And there's far too many of those in every organization. Right. And unfortunately, I'm sure we've seen a number of those in our careers. Right.
You're right. Yeah. So get the toxic people out of your life. That's what we're both saying.
Yeah.
I've learned the hard way, and I'm sure Joe's learned the hard way too.
Yeah. Well, and unfortunately, with what we've gone through in the past 5 years, including the pandemic and all of the other social unrest and finger pointing at police and in our community, it's not okay to have people around you now that have different opinions. It's just ridiculous. Is that how do you challenge your belief system and become stronger unless you're willing to listen to people with opposing points of view and still have friends that don't disagree with you?
So I wrote a blog on that a couple months ago, and I really grew as a person when I started surrounding myself with people who were not like me. Now, I'm not surrounding myself with jerk-offs, but people who have different points of view. If you can have an intelligent conversation and you can be willing to listen to me, then I'm going to listen to you too. And that's how we grow. But when I was young, man, I had this saying, look how arrogant and how shallow this was. If you weren't a man's man, I didn't even want to talk to you.
Yeah.
But that's not how we grow. I really, when I started reaching out, when we back in 2020, right. We had the pandemic, we had George Floyd. This area, Southwest Louisiana, had Hurricane Laura.
Absolutely.
Had some really devastating events. That's when I really started looking at being more diverse, listening to people, because I was responsible at that time for 200 men and women. And if we're going to be responsible for other people, then we have to make sure that we're doing our job to make sure we can protect them. And a lot of times it's protecting them from themselves.
Oh, yeah. Most definitely. And it was far too easy, and it's become too easy to only surround yourself or see things that support everything that you believe. Right. And what does groupthink do? Right. You don't grow. You don't challenge your belief systems. And if you're not challenging those things and making sure that they're locked in tight, when the crisis hits, man, you're not going to have the resources.
Yeah. And I think that we could get into politics too. But where I think we failed is, I'm just going to say it. Donald Trump is our nominee for Republican Party, and I'm going to vote Republican in a presidential election. And I do agree with some of the things that he says, some of his ideas. Here's the problem. When you don't work with other people, you can't get your ideas done.
Mhm.
And that's one thing as a leader. And if you are any type of high level person, relationships means everything if you're going to perform at the level that you're capable of. So if you have to be willing to work with other people and you can't always be right, your ego has to be pushed aside.
Mhm. Well, and really what it is it's accepting other people's beliefs and actually accepting the fact that, you know what, you may be wrong. And you will never find yourself wrong if you're always support around people that are going to agree with you, right? And like what you said too, is that was some of the best leadership advice that I ever got from someone, is that when you are in a position to be able to select the people that surround you in that position, make sure you're picking people that are not like yourself.
You're right. Now, that is one thing that I was, maybe it was by accident, I was smart enough to do.
Hmm.
I knew my faults and I knew what type of, with subordinate leaders, what I looked at first before I looked at them. And a lot of times I would have to explain that because they didn't think maybe I picked the right person. Well, I had to pick the right person for me.
Right.
I had to pick the right person. I'm sure you had to pick assistant chiefs. You
Absolutely.
had to pick
Yeah.
a command staff. Well, you look at a line of people, what you have to pick is the person who's right for you. So I always looked at myself, what am I lacking? I'm not going to change. I'm who I am. Who do I need to fill in the gap?
Right.
And that's the
Absolutely.
type of person that I would pick. So
Oh,
that was a good
absolutely.
point.
I truly agree with you. And when I had my assistant chief, I selected him obviously, and I'm not like a detail oriented person where I can chart all these things out and put
You're
them
an
on
operations
Excel
guy.
spreadsheets and things like that. I'm more of like the vision type person. I'm looking at it from maybe 30,000 feet and seeing where all of the chess pieces are and how to move them around. And he was detailed like you would not believe. And he became the chief, after that. But what my comfort level was when I can tell you the exact moment. It was February 7th at 11:30 in the morning in 2020, where I took my badge off and I pinned it on him.
That's good.
And after 35 years, I was no longer the police, but I was comfortable with the fact that I knew who he was. Brian is a high functioning human being, and he knew what the job was going to be. Obviously, I always joked that chair number 2 was more comfortable than chair 1, because once he got to chair 1, we had a lot of conversations over the years. And it was probably shortly after George Floyd happened that we had probably a 2 to 3 hour telephone conversation, because there was another event that took place in Two Rivers, and it got some national traction. And he called, and toward the end of the call, he said, "Tell me the truth. Can you predict the future?" Because I retired before the pandemic, right? And then I got in with my retirement at the right time, and so the pension was good, and all of these things happening. And then George Floyd happened, and this, and I said, "Well, yes, I can." And you don't want to hear the result of what's going to happen in the next couple of years, because I think that we all saw where that train was heading. Right? It had come off the tracks, and there was no way to get it back on the tracks. So
You're right. So when he picked the assistant chief, he was probably looking for a Joe Collins.
Well, I'm not sure.
If he was
Yeah.
that type of guy, he's looking for
Right.
somebody who would fill that gap.
Yeah, and that's looking back at it, I think that's who he's got
Yeah.
right now. And there's going through some really horrific stuff right now. They've got a 3-year-old that they've been missing for 3 weeks now, and they've been searching nonstop. And what a terrible situation to be in, and wanting to have closure and resolve and control over a situation that all you can do is just manage. And so yeah, I've reached out to a few folks that are working that, and it's tough.
And I'm sure you miss it. I know I miss it at times, but times like that, you don't. And we what I will never do is talk about or tell a lot of war stories. Stories come with, there's lessons and stories that we have, but I can tell you this, and we tend to, our generation, just like the generation before us, and the generation this next generation in 20 years are going to generation bash the younger ones. I'm not a generation basher. There are some differences. There are some challenges, but what we have to look at is their asset. Man, these kids are smart. Technology, information being at their fingertip, they're smart. What have you? I noticed because you became police chief in 2005. You were police chief for almost 20 years. I became a commander in 2004. I left in 20. In 17 years. I don't know. I'm sure you'll agree that, man, we saw it was almost like 100 years with the change that you're looking at with people. And I'd say it was technology and things. What are your thoughts?
Oh, absolutely. Well, and I actually became a police chief in 1999 because I did 6 years before I became the police chief in Two Rivers.
Wow. Okay.
So it was 21 years that I did as police chief. But yeah, you're talking technology, and I'm not ashamed to admit it. I sat in one of the cars toward the end of when I was getting ready to retire, and I was like, I didn't know how to run that stuff, and I had to have an officer because somebody did a flagrant violation right in front of me, right? So I stopped the person and I told him he's going to get a ticket, and I told him he can come down to the department and get his driver's license and pick up his ticket because I had no clue how to fill out a ticket in our new system, right? I still had a pad of tickets, right? And they're like, well, you're supposed to turn those in. I was like, okay, how do I give this person a ticket? And I had to have somebody actually do it for me. But the level of technology in a squad car now is just unbelievable. That they've got high-speed computers inside the car. Well, even in a cell phone, for God's sakes, that took up a warehouse. When we were in college, the Cray, it was a Cray computers. And I remember that I went to college in Eau Claire, and that's where that was based in Wisconsin. And it's unbelievable. And the distractions, but the technology now is also becoming a crutch for our folks because they don't communicate the way that they need to.
You're right about that. And another thing that I'm really big on, and I wrote several blogs on, is fundamentals of life. And I think that what happens, and this is, I'm going to brag on this generation, but I'm also going to caution them where they're failing is they lack fundamentals. They lack the fundamentals because of such convenience. I think that my son learned to drive on a stick shift. He had a Jeep and learned to drive on a stick shift. We are not doing things. Fundamentally, we're flawed because of the conveniences that we have. We're too dependent on these technology. And so what the pandemic's proved, and then here, when we have a hurricane, we're without power, we're without anything for a month, people lose their mind. They're not prepared. Fundamentally, that's where I see this generation has to recognize that fundamentally they're not sound.
Right. Well, and I think that we've seen that just on investigative skills, right? So I cannot tell you how many thousands of little notepads that I went through, right, when I started, because you wrote everything down, and you also had to listen and process and understand at a very high level when you're interviewing or you're interrogating somebody and you're working the case. And because of technology, and body cameras are great. I was a big endorser of having body cameras on people, but that is not your investigative tool to rely on for your investigation. And what we're seeing officers that had to review their body cam to be able to do their report. And it's like, well, what happened if that failed? Where are your notes? Where is what you have actually gathered from the individual? And it didn't exist unless they reviewed their video, because they were relying on the fact it was all captured. And no, that's not how you do business, right?
Well, I'll tell you a quick story. You're right about that. And to brag on our agency a little bit, the morning after Hurricane Laura hit, a couple were found dead in their house. And our violent crimes division which my wife, my wife,
Right. Yeah.
was the lieutenant. She might have been, she was a captain. They solved that and solved it quick. And that was a case they were probably the most proud of, and they had been successful in a lot.
Sure.
Because it was true police work. They had nothing, had no technology. Everything was down, and got a conviction. So fundamentally, again, you've got to be fundamentally sound, because you don't know when you have to go back to those fundamentals.
Well, if like we talked about before, is that during the crisis is not the time to change your belief system.
You're right.
And if you don't have the tools when the crisis hits, and you don't have those foundational skills and tools, you ain't going to make it up.
No, high level person is high level fundamentally.
Right.
They're not high level because they have all this access at their fingertips. They're not.
Right.
It's nice to have, and it makes them better, and it makes you more efficient. But a high level person, high level human is going to have strong fundamentals.
Well, it's almost, it's a tool that you have access to. It's not something that you have to rely on. And, if you don't have it, you don't have it. So we talked about off camera a little bit is I want to be raw. I want to hit the tough subjects. Mhm.
I don't edit much. If the dog starts barking, we're just going to deal with the dog barking. I've got this big obnoxious wire hanging off because I haven't got all my technology. I'm not technical. I don't have my fundamentals on the technology down yet. Let's dive into something that is, I know both of us have been impacted by police suicide. And I think it also goes to any high level person. And I want to talk a little bit about that. I know you've obviously done a lot of research and have been involved in. So I'll tell a little bit of story. And you and I have not talked about this. Sure. I texted to you briefly, but Matt Tuttle. I don't know if you remember Matt.
I do.
So Matt was the closest friend that I made at the National Academy. Not to offend you, but if Matt was still alive, he'd probably be sitting here first. He was just the best guy.
Right.
I knew his best friend. I knew his girlfriend. We had visited in 2010 at a conference in Boston. 2011, Matt took his own life.
Right.
Matt Tuttle was a captain, New Britain, Connecticut Police Department. He was a respected guy. He got in a little trouble. I'm going to go ahead and say what it was, because I don't want people thinking that Matt raped somebody.
No.
Matt got drunk, got in a wreck.
Right.
He ran from the police. He got arrested. Went home and took his own life.
Yeah.
And I'm still, man, it hurts me to talk about it. I'm still mad at him because he would have been okay. And what I learned from Matt's death, and what I learned from, what's your opinion on? I talked to his girlfriend for a few minutes. She's crying, I'm crying, and I just wanted to call and tell her, that I loved her and that I loved him. I called his best friend named Tony. I'll never forget. I have carried this with me since 2011. This is what Tony told me. He said, James, I'm mad at him. He said, they loved Matt here. He probably would have got suspended, would have gotten demoted. This is what I will never forget what Tony told me. He said, in 6 months, nobody would have remembered this happened. So I don't think, and look, I talked to him quite a bit. I think there's a difference. This is what I'd like your take on. There are people who are dealing with struggles. And then there are people, to me, that just do it impulsively. My take is Matt was fine, and he did something that he felt like he embarrassed himself, embarrassed his department, embarrassed his family, and he did something spontaneous. What's your take on that?
Well, first of all, he probably had a whole lot going on that we didn't know about, right? And it's usually not something that's that we look back on as some major, huge event that was too much. It was it's kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back type of thing, right? And one one too many drops into the vessel that overflowed. But like you said before, is that when somebody is struggling with something and spiraling potentially out of control, they don't see any other possible avenues out except for one, right? And looking back, and like you were saying, is that we've had suicide in our family, right? In difficulties, and we've seen a lot of those things. And what we look back at it, and we look at the events that took place and the outcomes, we're looking at it from a rational mind. And when somebody's in that, like you said, impulsively, you think that that's the only option, right? And what we see is an awful lot of suicides within the first responder community, and specifically police. And a lot of those deal with alcohol. It is the maybe if alcohol wasn't involved and he got in trouble and stuff, that he wouldn't necessarily have diminished his resources by becoming too much alcohol in the system, right? Yeah, and I looked into that too, and the policies of that agency were very strict as to any alcohol issues, right? And then for him to make horrible decisions, and the outcomes, the shame and the fear that's associated with asking for help and letting people know that you're struggling with something within our community is tough. Because what do we hire people to do? We hire them to be problem solvers.
Yeah.
And when you can't fix your own stuff, there's a lot of stress and trauma involved in that, right?
Well, he was a high level guy, one of the finest men that I ever knew, and I want our listeners to always remember what his friend Tony told me. In 6 months,
Mm-hmm.
and nobody would remember
Mm-hmm.
that it happened. And I think that when you talked about alcohol, so I don't mind being controversial too. That's something that, we talk about personal life and professional life like they're two different things.
Right.
And I stood in front of a group of people, a group of our sergeants and lieutenants several years ago. And I said, I don't want to hear, well, that's their personal life. It's not our business.
Right.
It is our business. And and there's a line.
Mhm.
It's not, we're not trying to be the moral police. We're not trying to control people's lives. But especially in law enforcement or first responders or any high level job, you have one life. You
Absolutely.
don't have a personal life and professional life. You have one life.
Absolutely.
And you tell me a time that your personal life and your professional life did not overlap and did not intertwine.
Right.
And my point to this group, and I want your take on this,
Mhm.
my point to this group was about alcohol. So when you have a guy who's drinking a lot, well, what happens? He's probably drinking, even though he may not be drunk when he comes to work.
Right.
Did he sleep well? Is he rested? Is he hungover all the time? So what happens in this profession and in other ones, you get your ass shot off, you get killed, and what it stem from? Alcohol.
Yep.
Or another thing in police work, we work ourselves to death on side jobs.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're getting 4 hours of sleep
Mhm.
and you're getting your ass shot off because you're not rested.
All right. Well, you're in all kinds of different levels in the space that we deal with every single day, including on my drive here. It was about 2-hour drive, and I spent 40 minutes on talking with a firefighter about this exact same stuff. And it's what is the coping mechanism that we have when we're struggling, right? And at first, I drink. I enjoy wine. I enjoy whiskey with you, but the problem is that we have a lot of first responders that, like you were saying, is that they believe that if they can't get to sleep, if they drink themselves to sleep, that's going to get them the rest that they need. Well, it's not, because when you sleep, what you really need is REM sleep, right? And that takes anywhere from 6 to 7 hours of sleep to get that 90 minutes of REM sleep. And what does REM sleep do? It processes your memories and put them where they belong. And if you're drinking and passing out, you're not getting any REM sleep. So what are you doing? You're waking up with all of this stuff that's still spinning in your head, and it's not where it's supposed to be, right? And then you're going to work, right? So they may not be under the influence, but they don't have sleep. And sleep is one of the most important things. And that we recently were talking to a lot of our folks, and David Grossman actually says at this point that what they're seeing is about 30% of the first responder community that has sleep apnea. Me too. I've been on a CPAP machine for 15 plus years because I wasn't sleeping. I couldn't get into that REM sleep and I was constantly waking up. And so we have to sleep. We can't interrupt our sleep by drinking too much because that's going to get us out of that system, right? And what we see is a lot of people that are struggling with things and their only coping mechanism is to drink. You know, I talked to a young officer out in California that he was calling because he was struggling with alcohol, right? So I asked him the question specifically, tell me about your trauma at home and at work. What does it look like, your work trauma? And here's his quote. I just deal with normal police shit. I don't have trauma. Right. So I jokingly said, well, I have no idea what your definition of normal police shit is. Right. Can you tell me what that is? And he's like, well, 3 weeks ago, I went to a call that a 2.5-year-old had been killed. Last week, I went to a call where a 10-year-old actually slit his mother's throat and killed her. That's what he considered normal police shit. Right. And I said, so.
And it is, but that's not normal human shit.
Exactly. And so I said, so why are you drinking? He goes, because I can't get those pictures out of my head. And the only way I get them out of my head is by drinking and passing out. So what we have done to our population, right, in the police and fire and EMS world is we have forced them to look at the world a different way, right? We have asked them, they have stepped up to the job, right, to go in and take care of business that nobody else wants to take care of. Well, that can potentially take a pretty big toll on somebody's life when you're looking at your lens through. And what I say is that there's two different worlds. There's the worlds of probability and there's a world of possibility. And a normal human being gets to live in this world of probability. And what does that mean? That we can go down to Walmart or we can go to the mall or we can go to the school and probably nothing's going to happen there today. And if you're in that space, if probably nothing's going to happen, you can enjoy your time there. What we have required of our first responders is to flip that switch and now live in the world of possibility. Because possibly it's going to happen here today. Possibly it's going to happen at the school. Possibly it's going to happen in the restaurant. Because what do you do when you walk into a restaurant? Where are the exits, right? And where can I sit so that I can watch every single person that walks in there that might be a threat? So if you're living in that world, you got to have a plan. If you have a plan, that means you're activated. And if you're activated, you're pumping cortisol and adrenaline into your system all of the time, all the time. And those are chemicals that will kill you because they are corrosive. And the number one killer of any first responder right now is cardiac disease. And the number one killer for cardiac is stress and the buildup of cortisol.
So I want to touch on alcohol, but before that, so what should our first responders be doing to counter that?
You have got to take time for self-care. Self-care is not an indulgence. It is a necessity. So you have got to do something to have positive coping mechanisms in your life so that when the crisis hits, that you can rely on those tools, right? And if you don't do it on purpose, then you're not going to be able to do that. And what does that look like? There's all kinds of different things. Physical fitness. Alcohol. No, it's not. It can be as a social.
Yep, and that's what I'm going to touch on.
Under control, absolutely. But if you become dependent on alcohol as your only mechanism when things get difficult, that's going to go in a bad way. So anything that you're using that you're not using correctly, social media. You know, I talk to people that they're addicted to their phones and they'll YouTube themselves for hours and hours and hours, right? Because what? They're trying to disassociate and segregate themselves from everything else.
So alcohol, it's I'm glad you brought that up. Mm-hmm. So I'm definitely not into alcohol. And I'll drink. I'm a 1-drink guy. I try to limit myself to 2, maybe 3 drinks a week. So we're recording this on a Tuesday. Mm-hmm. Tonight, I'll have my first segment, doing about a 5-10 minute segment. It's going to be in my bar. And it's 2-Finger Tuesday. Where I'm so and what I'm bringing out in that segment is I don't drink to intoxication. I can't tell you the last time I was intoxicated.
Mm-hmm.
But for some reason, when we have a drink, even if it's not alcohol, if it's coffee, more conversations, more things get solved over a drink. So there's nothing wrong with that.
Not.
But drinking to intoxication and drinking to cope with problems, that's a problem.
Okay. And really the core question that you need to ask yourself is that, why am I doing this? Are you doing it for enjoyment and relaxation and to be social with other people? Absolutely. If you're drinking or doing any of those other things because you need to disassociate with life, then you need to ask yourself, is this what I should be doing? And it's gambling. It's all of these different addictions, right?
Yeah, we talk about alcohol because that's in law enforcement. It's normally not, it has been narcotics before.
Right.
Normally it's alcohol
Yeah.
because it's legal.
Mm-hmm. It's prevalent.
Yeah. And I have known some cops who have had gambling problems.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just, there's, anything that you're addicted to, anything that you're doing in extreme and in excess that's not healthy, then that is a problem.
Yeah. Well, what you're looking for is that you're looking for positive chemical release in your system, right? Because you want to feel better. It's like high adventure athletes, special operations people. It's flow state, right? You get into the flow state where everything is like exactly where it's supposed to be. You're functioning at a high level. Well, that's dumping dopamine and all these good chemicals into your system, right? Because it makes you feel better. And if you can't feel better, what you're going to try to do is artificially put some of those chemicals in your system to make you feel better. And that's what this is. And it's not necessarily just alcohol or chemicals. It's on the phone. It's that we got an awful lot of first responders that are addicted to pornography, and all of these different damaging relationships that they get involved in because it's a high risk thing, right?
Because it's such access now.
Mm-hmm.
You have such an access to pornography, and I was speaking with a group or an organization, and the speaker before me, this several years ago, was a child psychologist,
Mm-hmm.
and he was talking about this generations because of what's at their fingertips.
Mm-hmm.
You got 14-year-olds, they expect them to have some wild sex at their first sexual experience because of the porn they've been watching since they were 12. So yeah, that's a problem too.
Yeah. And again, it's why are you doing or why are you involved in any type of activity? Because it hopefully, if it's a positive thing, it's going to make you feel better, right? In Kevin Gilmartin's book, right, Emotional Survival for Law Enforcement, he talks about don't become a used to, meaning that I used to go fishing, I used to hang out with my friends, I used to go bowling. And why is that? Because you enjoyed those things. And hanging out with friends, talking with you, it makes me feel good, right? So those are the positive tools that I have in my life, right? And one of the greatest tools that we teach in our resiliency class is gratitude and count your blessings, because in normal human beings, studies have shown that about 80% of human beings go negative all the time on every situation. And we joke, but I don't know that it's necessarily a joke, that first responders, probably 99.5% go negative. Because why? Because we're always called to fix problems, right? We're not called down to the neighbors on a call to celebrate, right, that their kid got straight A's in school. Because usually we are called because they have a crisis that they can't handle. So we have to go in, figure out what the problems are, figure out what the solutions are, and help them get out of their conundrum that they're in, right? So when you're doing that all the time, that's your default, right? So you're stuck in these ruts of negativity, and it's hard to get out of them unless you do something the right way to get yourself out of them, build the tools of positivity and seeing the amazing things that are happening in your life to be able to reset your internal chemicals, right? I was driving over here today, and I cannot believe how beautiful that sunrise was on the way over here. It was beautiful. Yeah. And there's a whole nother science, and it's called the science of awe, AWE, and actually seeing things that your whole system goes, wow, that's awesome. It's amazing. So what that does, it makes you pause for a minute, reflect on that, and it dumps those chemicals into your body. And you won't see them and you won't recognize them unless you do it on purpose, intentionally.
No, I agree. I agree with that. And that's some really good stuff. So I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit as we close
Absolutely,
it out.
bro.
We get
Bring it
close,
on, man.
close
What do
to
you
an
got?
hour. So you are, in my opinion, a high-level person. That's just not my opinion. It's factual. You've achieved a lot in your life. So let's close this out by telling us what you feel like has contributed to you being a high-level person. What habits that you have, what routines, what makes Joe Collins the high-level person that we know that he is?
Well, first of all, that's your label you're assigning to me, so I don't necessarily have to accept that. But what I do, and I try to really take time for myself so that I can be a better person. And John Maxwell, I'm sure you heard John, he's written hundreds of books, and Minute with Maxwell and all this thing. One of the phrases that he had in one of his books, and I'm a big Audible book person, so I'm listening.
I am too.
I'm listening to books on the way over here.
I am too.
And I joke because I know all the 80s lyrics, so I don't have to listen to those music. They're already in my head. But one of his books that he had a quote, and he said, the best gift that you can give to anybody that you truly care about, the absolute best gift that you can give somebody else is a better you.
You're right.
Because you cannot provide the level of care that you want to give to somebody else unless you're taking care of yourself. So what do I do? Every morning I have a morning ritual that I try to do for myself to make myself feel better, clear my head, get myself in the right state of mind, right? So I'll do mindful coffee time in the morning, right? I'll make some coffee. My daughter at one point, she gave me a hand grinder and an AeroPress. And so what I was doing is every Saturday, I would do mindful Saturday coffee morning, right? Mm-hmm. I would get a good full bean coffee and I'd hand grind it. You could feel it, right? You could feel every single time it'd like get hung up and it caught it. And then the aroma from that, right? And then I would do an AeroPress, very similar to a French press. Man, that coffee tastes good.
Really?
But the thing is that you have to be mindful and you have to be there. You have to be present at that time. Because there's another great phrase out there is that if you are not in control of your thoughts are in control of you. And the only way that you are able to exercise that activity is by practicing it. Otherwise, you can't do it. So my mindful coffee, right? So I'll do some mindfulness in the morning, some meditation. I'll go out for a walk, right? And get myself physically active. One of my great friends and my partner, Bill Mazer, he talked about vitamin D and actually having an unfiltered exposure to the sun and vitamin D. Obviously, you're not going to stare into the sun for a long period of time, but having that directly on your face in the morning to start the day, it does a chemical reaction to your system. And doing things regularly, repeatedly, because you need them, and then gratitudes. I've shared gratitudes with people since a good friend of mine from high school, Mike, since May 19th of 2019. I started on a gratitude challenge, a 21-day gratitude challenge. I'm not good at math, but here we are, right? And things happened over those 21 days that, of course, they happened because I was open to the possibility that all these things are always happening. And I reconnected with people I had not connected with in 30 years by posting something out there, them responding to me and saying, wow, one of them was a classmate I hadn't seen in 20 years. And we took a group of people down to the Brewers game when I was working in Wisconsin. And we took a picture before we went into the game. And I posted it on my Facebook page as a gratitude. And one of my friends saw it. He's like, hey, I'm at the game. Let's have a beer. I didn't see him in 20 years. And it's like because of what I was doing and what I was sharing, I was able to have even more gratitude and blessings in my life.
So you're right, definitely, and about the vitamin D. So I'm not going to, this is about you. It's not about me. I'm going to talk about next week on my Man's Man Monday. I'm going to talk about my morning routine. But one of them is in the morning, the first 45 minutes of sun. Now, if you've never studied Gary Brecka, man, study Gary Brecka. He talks about that I stare into the sun every morning within the first 45 minutes of sunrise. And that has completely changed with some other things that I'm doing, has completely changed just my focus, my mental health, everything. So you're right. So, well, Joe, I appreciate you coming, making the drive. So being an in-person guest, there's some benefits to that. Number one, we go eat lunch. Normally we would go to Cousins, which you've been there twice with me for my retirement party, and then we went there another time for supper.
Some good boudin over there, man.
They do. So we're going to go to. You got to get back to Houston, so we're going to go to Westlake, the Max Restaurant, which is a good restaurant. So we're going to go there.
Absolutely.
But you also get a bottle of McGee family wine that I make right here. It's a Sangiovese. That's my appreciation. Being an in-person guest, you just get treated a little bit different. And I appreciate you, appreciate your friendship. Yes, I feel 100% you are a high-level person, but there is a status that is James McGee, and not that it matters to anybody but me, but in the highest level status, so James McGee is, you're a good fucking dude. Joe Collins, you're a good fucking dude. I appreciate you coming on. I appreciate your friendship, and I appreciate what you were doing, your ministry that you have chosen to help first responders and to help cops, and you're a special guy.
Well, thank you. And it doesn't just mean something to you, it means something to me as well. Because, that when you find your purpose in life, your purpose for existing, everything you do is geared toward that. And this is why I do it.
You're right. Okay. This concludes our episodes. McGee and Collins are out.
All right.